extreme example, but a new report found that there has been an 18% increase in the level of homelessness in America year over year. Stay tuned after the break, and Tiffany will break down for us what that report says. And now that we are fully caught up on the H-1B visa debate, one of the consequences of importing so many immigrants to take up jobs and essentially bidding out the American local workforce is that their wages get depressed, and some of them who are already, let's say, on the lower tier fall below that tier, which is the state of homelessness. A recent report found that there was an 18% year-over-year increase in homelessness. Tiffany, is that true?
That is what the report is saying. So last week, basically what happened is the Biden administration came out and was talking about this number, which is from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They have their annual data that comes out. Well, what is interesting is this data that they do is just one single night of the year in January. And so the way they calculate it is that when they did this data reporting, that's what they do every year, just one night. What they found was about 770,000 of residents in the U.S. were either experiencing at least one night in a shelter, a temporary housing, or on the streets.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
There is.
Okay, so it's one single night in January.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess the first question is like, how do they collect that data?
That's just how they do their data collecting.
Okay, are they like asking people on the streets?
Yeah, so
like the jobs report.
So there's a couple different in that, right? It's like either you're like in the street, you're in a temporary housing, or they just ask people. So under that, there's several different categories. But before we get to the categories, the way the news was reacting to this was immediately you had a ton of different media reports in their headlines noting this number, and then you have the Associated Press and Politico saying that this number underlines the crisis of affordable housing, or the lack of, in the U.S. But then when you start digging into these numbers, it's like, okay, well, some of this is in the report too. So the report itself notes this, that some of this was from the Maui fire in Hawaii, where you did have over 5,200 people were not in their own homes because they burned down. So they were in hotels, right? But that's not their home. So that counts as homeless. And then you had another part where it was the impact of immigration, especially on family homelessness. So when it comes to like a group or a family of immigrants, they saw that number went up 39% from the previous year.
And they were counted as homeless.
Yeah, so if you're in a temporary shelter so like the sanctuary cities and stuff, that gets into the immigration question, because that's what they were noticing as well. Like if you start digging into the numbers of, wait, okay, so what are we actually seeing here? Because you do have cities like New York, Chicago, and Denver, where they are sanctuary cities, and those cities saw their number either double or triple, like they saw double or triple digit increases in terms of homelessness that they saw, because the ones in the shelters, like the migrant shelters, or in New York, the 5-star hotels, those count as homeless as well, because that's not their home. It's just a temporary place.
Well, it's true, but I guess they are still homeless. Like, they're still a homeless individual in the city. Yeah.
As that number. So then...
That the city's paying for it. Presumably that's why these numbers are important.
And then as a result, right, you see President Biden pledging more money into these different departments. You've seen California, where they have billions of dollars to deal with their homeless problem. But then they have... there's new federal data just for California, so it's a lot more recent than this, because this is like one night in January.
Well, that's another question. So, okay, one night in January.
That's how they did the data.
And the report was released last month. So that data does not reflect 2024.
No, so this is like how they calculate it, though. So for year on year, they're like, one night of the year we go around, we poke it, and that's the numbers from the previous year.
But they released it before this January. So that number is for 2023.
No, because this was just last week that the Biden administration came out to cite this data, which is from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the data from that was collected on January of 2024. So we're now in 2025. So that's the number.
Why didn't it come out February 1st, 2024?
Right.
But then since like that's how they do it, so they're saying like that was the number compared to like the number they saw the previous year. That's the way they do it.
Why didn't it come out, Cindy? Did we have an election or something? Would an 18% spike in homelessness hurt the election? I don't know. I mean, here's the real thing that gets me with this. Okay, so here's what you do. You import 10 million people, make them be reliant on government handouts, document resident that is homelessness, then demand money from the federal government under housing and urban development to pay for your homelessness. You get money in your state from the federal government then, and they basically bail out your housing industries. Is this how this works? I just heard an interview from a mayor, and he basically said all these NGOs are being loaded with cash, and then they're probably just giving it off to the politicians who gave it back to them. It's just a circle.
NGOs,
I mean,
yeah,
it's a circle. I mean, this is like 440 chess of business right here. Especially if you get into the real estate market. Is that what they're doing? I have wondered with this.
That was the argument that you had now Vice President like J.D. Vance arguing about, the housing or affordability crisis. He was saying it's an immigration crisis, that they're bidding against each other for the same limited homes, like we were talking earlier about the same limited jobs. So that's one argument that is out there. The only good news, if you want, of this report was that the homelessness among veterans dropped to the lowest in record. They saw a decrease of 8%. So there has been more efforts put into making sure that veterans can find a home instead of like temporary situations.
Is that the real solution? Because I also know another report that said like veteran suicides are at an all-time high. So I mean, like, I know that sounds macabre, but like they know for a fact that veteran homelessness is declined because they were able to find homes.
That's what this report is saying, yes.
Is that
I find that falsified.
By say like the Veterans Affairs Department and stuff like that, where it seems to be successful because they said they saw nearly 8% decrease from the previous year, and they're saying that is one side of success.
So that's the only positive in that report.
Yeah, well,
that's
depends on how you want. Maybe not if you're an NGO. You're seeing this as a great report.
Oh yeah, or like a local politician, Especially if Trump actually does kick out all these illegal migrants, still get that money, right? Because the money is reflected based on the homelessness number. The homelessness number increased, and it'll probably take another year for that number to go back down if they're only doing January, right? Well, how much money do they get from housing and urban development then? Does that have to go to building new homes? Like, what does that work?
There's a couple different categories. So it depends on like how you look at it and then where it goes and then how it's used, right? So then it's like you have now the different number, the new federal number in terms of California, where California's homeless population actually grew, and so then now you
actually grew.
It grew. Obviously not. So this is a
this is also
data
like illegal
stat.
immigrants. Right.
So this is like
That's a better place to be homeless, truthfully.
Yeah.
Because you're
warmer weather. Yeah, you're not gonna be freezing to death. But so obviously this is a different data set. This is more recent for just California. And it's saying California's homeless population grew to 187,000, so it's about a 3% increase. And then a lot of critics are being like, wait, because California, especially California's Governor Gavin Newsom, is always touting the billions of dollars they're spending on homelessness. You had the
like $25 billion a year. I think
California is the most expensive state to live in.
It is, and then you have the videos of Gavin Newsom out there like clearing out the homeless.
Wait, so are they building houses, or is this like a high-speed rail type?
Where everyone was like, is this a PR stunt? What happened to the people afterwards?
It's not a house issue, really, is it? It's a money issue. And one of the big problems that the people, I watched so many interviews of people explaining why they became unhoused or why they became homeless. And they say they racked up a lot of credit card debt, they got medical debt, their now deceased mother was really sick. And then they find themselves out on the streets. The problem is that they don't have a place to stay. The real problem is that they have no more money left, and they're riddled with debt. And one statistic that I wanted to search for as soon as I knew that we're going to talk about homelessness tonight is consumer debt. And I found out that our consumer debt, credit card debt, has gone up to $1 trillion. $1 trillion. 18 trillion for household debt in the U.S.
Oh, just went up to 18.1 interest.
Yeah, there you go. And that's up 50. And they wrote off, the big guys, the big banks, they wrote off just from, the first to the 9th month of last year, they wrote off like $46 billion of debt that they know they're never going to see again because people can't afford it. We have inflation. We have the costs of just living in California, like I mentioned. And then you have credit card debt, which averages around
The
20%
quiet
interest
recession.
rate. I mean, you can't get a break. These people, if Trump doesn't carry out his campaign promise that he made in Long Island, that he was going to cap credit card interest rates at like 10%, I don't know. We're going to see a lot more homeless people in this country.
Well, people just put more on their credit card if it goes down? I mean, there's no. That's like a little tiny piece of this.
All right, Chris. With that extremely upbeat final word from you, I'm getting, the word from the producer that we have to wrap up. However, Josh, give me 20 seconds of positivity.
I got nothing, man.
Cindy, 20 seconds of, give me something positive.
I'm going to build on what Josh said.
Okay, listen.
Hey, we might take over Canada. There you go.
Yeah.
Free maple syrup. That's
And if we take over any of those real estate acquisitions, that will solve a lot of issues, a lot of natural resources, and Empire needs to grow. Listen, thank you so much for tuning in. And ultimately, what matters is your local community, your family. The news does not matter so much. My producers tell me to not denigrate the news. Please be back here next time, same channel, prime time. We'll have our lovely guests discussing what's happening in the country.